You know how there's some people in your life that whenever you talk to them, you just feel a little bit better somehow? One of those for me is today's guest, Nava Atlas, who's been on the podcast before, and she is one of the OG vegan, before that vegetarian cookbook authors. Her stuff has been in print for over 40 years. She has been a guiding light and a force in the plant-based community, and she is just a really wonderful human being. It's just so much fun to talk to her. She's got a big heart, and you can see there's passion in what she's doing and in her advocacy without rancor, without criticism, without divisiveness. And in a world in which we can look around and see all sorts of bad things happening, it's nice to be reminded when there are good trends. And as someone who's been in the plant-based movement for 40 years, Nava has seen how things have shifted, how certain foods have become easier to get, how the quality of vegan products and restaurants and sort of social acceptability of not eating meat has really made it a lot easier for a lot of people. So that's kind of the gist of our conversation. We do talk about her latest cookbook, Vegan Soups and Stews for All Seasons, which I have been cooking out of pretty religiously. Well, full disclosure, my wife has been doing most of the cooking these days. But I look at the pictures and I eat the food, so credit, hey. So join us for this conversation. I think it will be heartwarming for you as well. And we don't shy away from difficult topics. We don't shy away from what's going on in the world, but talking with Nava can kind of help frame it in a hopeful and action-oriented way, the way she has lived her own life. So without further ado, Nava Atlas, welcome back to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I can't remember how many cookbooks ago.
Well, I kind of remember the last one. I think I've been on your program more than that, but I call my COVID project when I redid Vegetariana.
Yeah.
And we talked about that. So it came out at the end of 2021. I think we were still all a bit sequestered at that point.
Uh-huh.
That was the last one we went into depth about.
Well, I bet a lot of, because of what you do, I think a lot of people have had a fairly intimate relationship with your work through pandemic, through COVID, because you're sitting in the kitchen with them, chatting about ingredients, helping them nourish their families. So I'm actually, what comes to me as the first question is have you gotten different kinds of feedback from readers since the pandemic?
That's a really good question, but I would probably say not so different. I do send out a newsletter every week, which people can subscribe to by going to my site, the Vegan Atlas. It's been pretty steady, but the thing that comes to my mind is the fact that the vegan media has exploded so much that I'm competing, in a pie that's divided into smaller and smaller pieces, but I'm really so glad it's growing. I'm thrilled that from the time I started, I'm going to make a confession here. Vegetariana is now 40 years old. Okay, so these people don't do the math. I was very young when it came out first.
Yeah,
but when
8 or 9, right?
Absolutely. So when Vegetariana came out, I was and I did the research on this, maybe a dozen vegetarian cookbook authors that broke into the mainstream. Imagine just vegetarian. We weren't even, vegan existed, but we weren't saying that word yet. So then fast forward to when I published this, 37-ish years later. And now you can throw a stick and hit 1 million vegan blogs and vegan cookbooks, forget it. But, it makes it harder for me to, I don't want to use the word compete so much because I feel like I don't want to be competitive with my fellow vegans. But there is so much more out there. And it's kind of, for me to have had that perspective and seen how it's grown over several decades is really pretty remarkable. Because, as we were talking about, before we start recording, not a whole lot has gotten better in the last, let's say, 20 or 30 years. This is, I always say this is one area that has really gotten better. I mean, 30 years ago, it would have been even a problem to go out to eat in a lot of cities, right? And now, you go to almost any major city, there are designated vegan restaurants, there's designated portions of menus and traditional restaurants. People know what a vegan is. People don't make fun of, well, some people, I suppose, make fun of vegans, but it's more of an admiration thing now than it used to be, rather than you're really a weirdo. I remember we were considered weirdos just for being vegetarians when we
Yeah,
started.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, I hear lots. I hear it's like jokes about vegans. It's almost endearing at this point.
yeah. Oh, I let it roll off my back. There's that old one already. It's funny to have a vegan joke that's already old, right? That's a good sign too. Is like, how do you know who the vegan is at a party? And the answer is, don't worry, they'll let you know. And
Yeah,
it's a little bit funny, but it's also kind of true.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I remember. I think back in the day when I first started flirting well, I went vegan in 1990, and
Oh, you're a pioneer, sort of.
well, I dropped it in the mid 90s. I
Okay.
kind of forgot about it, but there was Laurel's Kitchen.
Yeah,
There
exactly.
was Moosewood, Molly. I'm blanking on her
Molly
last name.
Katzen.
Molly
Yeah.
Katzen from Moosewood,
There's
and I think Deborah Madison.
Francis Moore LaPay, but those were actually more like 70s to 80s people, and those are the ones that I kind of scoped out. I scoped out about 12 of us, and now I don't even remember who the 12 are, but yeah, those
Yeah,
among
and you.
me, the 8-year-old me.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting too, this So Vegetariana started out as a vegetarian cookbook, and was this, yeah, the one in 2021 was the first time I veganized it. Vegan soups and stews for all seasons, which I just came out with. I self-published it in 1990. It was called Vegetarian Soups for All Seasons. And then it went to Little Brown and Company as Vegetarian Soups for All Seasons. Went out of print. I republished it. I think I veganized it at that point. Then Random House picked it up and then went out of print. So we're talking about, maybe almost 35 years. But what really struck me, even from the previous edition to this one, books that came out in the like 2010-ish era, we didn't have as many, first of all, plant-based milks. So my books say, though from that era, say rice milk or soy milk.
Hmm.
That's what we had. And neither of them are particularly great in cooking. Although I
Yeah.
understand soy milk has gotten better. So now we have all these choices. My plant-based milk of choice is pretty much always oat milk, because I think it's
Hmm.
easiest on the environment. But cashew milk is really good. And we have all these, hemp milk is delicious and very easy to make at home. So even within the vegan realm, things have really evolved in the last like,
Yeah.
10 or 12 years. That's why I
And
feel like I redo my books all the time.
yeah, and I'm really curious about your evolution. As I'm trying to remember the last cookbook we talked about. It might have been um, sort of like the analog meats book.
Oh, that's true. I might have been on your show more than 3 times then in this case, because I wonder if I also came on your show to discuss the 2010s books, which was Vegan Holiday Kitchen and Wild About Greens. So, as far as my
Yeah.
own personal evolution, well, first of all, I became vegetarian in high school, which was a long time ago, and it was pretty unusual. I was a weirdo at that point, and I did it because I just didn't like meat. I didn't, we didn't have the internet, so I didn't know about ethics. I didn't really, honestly, I didn't even connect meat that much with animals because we're trained not to.
Yeah.
And so my mom was a traditional Jewish cook, and I just didn't like her cooking. And I announced, and she said, well, I'm not making 2 meals. So she said, if you want to be a vegetarian, you'll have to cook for yourself. I've probably told the story a million times. So I said, great. I was from Michigan. Everybody, if you want to get around in Michigan, you have to learn to drive at 16. So I would go to the health food store, which was not like the natural food stores of today. It was like these really dusty little stores with a lot of vitamins and dry things and brown things. But I just fell in love with it. And I'd go home and I'd cook my, lentils and oat groats and whatever I found there.
There was something really charming about the natural foods world before mergers and acquisitions.
Oh, there was for sure.
Like you hear the stories about just these crazy people who started, like a company like Cascadian Farms or Soy Boy, like they all got, or like they all got bought up by, Unilever or whatever, and they're part or General Mills. They're part of these big corporate conglomerates, but a lot of them started so quirky, and they had all these like weird, like utopian governance, and like operating kind of under the radar of OSHA, and like
Yeah.
you could get sort of the best and the worst. But there was something very charming about the kind of products you would find that were so niche. Like you'd
Right.
find different stuff in a health food store in Buffalo versus Princeton, New Jersey versus Michigan versus the West Coast.
Well, that's true. And also, when we talk about the word products, there weren't really as many products. It was more like foods that you buy in bulk and things in bags. And I remember even at the beginning of when people could get tofu, we dig it out of a thing with water. It wasn't like nicely packaged in the tub, which is probably in terms of tofu, is safer because tofu can spoil very quickly. But yeah, I'm really sort of glad that I lived through all of that. It was really interesting to see. So, being vegetarian for many years, then I met my husband, and he was raised in a very similar household. And his brother loved their mom's traditional Jewish cooking, and he couldn't stand it. And he
Yeah.
was so happy to become a vegetarian. And he was the one who actually inspired me to write Vegetariana. He said, "Oh, this is so good. Why don't you write it down so you could make it again?" And at the time, I was a freelance illustrator and graphic designer. So I put it together with my design illustration. I'd had no idea what I was doing. I'm skimming over this part really quickly. But because I got a contract to do Vegetariana, I started to go down an unexpected path. The public, it did very well. And then the public, because there were only 12 of us back then, and they contracted me to do another, which was called American Harvest. And that set me on the path of, writing about food, being a cookbook author. And as far as becoming vegan, so this summer is 22 years vegan. I can't do the math anymore. What that would be in the early 90s, I guess, right?
That'd be 32 years vegan then.
No, 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 no. It's definitely been 22 years because
So that's
my
22. It was 2002 was 22 years ago.
oh, right, right. Well, that's why I wasn't a math major. I
Yeah.
was an art major. So
I don't know a lot, but I know that.
well, see, I'm even worse. But my son is 32, and I know how long we've been vegan because he went vegan. He was the first to announce, and he was 10.
Okay.
I've
And
been
he
thinking,
led?
yes, I've been actually thinking about it, but again, because we are so conditioned, I thought, is it really good for children not to have regular milk? And I thought about it, and I was really very hesitant. So I thought, well, maybe if we get our regular milk from a local dairy farm, then
Hmm.
I'll feel better about it. So we took the kids, we were 10 and 12 at the time, and we drove up to this dairy farm in upstate New York. It was really like this bucolic scene with the black and white spotted. It was a beautiful day. The cows in the meadow with the sky, and it was just a beautiful. And the farmer was so proud of his operation until two things happened. First of all, he took us into this big room and said, "This is where the cows get impregnated." People don't think about that. Cows, they have to be artificially impregnated in order to calve. The worst thing was then we went outside, and I still remember the scene. Really, it's so vividly because I think you kind of traumatic scenes kind of stick in the mind. There was these crates with little calves in it, And I said, well, what happens with these? And he said very casually, oh, they'll become veal.
Hmm.
Well, you know, my son, all of us were so quiet on the way home. And my son just couldn't go vegan fast enough. The next day, I gave him a rice cheese sandwich for camp. And he came home and there was the rice cheese sandwich. I said, why didn't you eat this? And he said, because now I'm a vegan. He thought it was cheese.
Hmm.
And I remember I said, well, couldn't you have become a vegan after lunch? He would rather have starved than eat what he thought was cheese. And I
Uh-huh.
think that just showed so much integrity. I thought that, look, the only thing we had left in the fridge was I think some goat cheese. And I said, if a 10-year-old can go vegan, then we all can. And this was, I guess what we figured out, it was when it 2002, things were starting. The internet was starting. We could get information. There was rice milk and soy milk. I think even vegan cheese definitely existed because that was rice cheese. It wasn't as good as the cheese like we have today with all the
Yeah.
choices like Violife and Miyoko and all of that. So, really it's interesting to see even something like cheese, how much in the last 20 years vegan cheese has progressed.
Yeah. So I'm curious that, you had all these cookbooks that were vegetarian,
Yeah.
which in some ways, in most ways, you're way ahead of the curve. But then this other movement comes along, vegan, like you could easily have, like I'm thinking about myself, like I might have resisted that. I'm like almost like a moral affront, like they're trying to tell me I'm not good enough. And you rolled with it and you've started veganizing all of your books. I'm wondering what that inner experience was like for you. Did you have any of those conflicts?
No, I feel like seeing what really goes on a so-called, humane dairy farm, like you can't unsee that. And I'm sure if we had gone to an abattoir, as they call them euphemistically, it would have been even worse. But they don't let, regular people or journalists into those places. It became to me like an inner value. And that's when it clicked, the animal and what they have to go through to become food or to make our food. And so, like I said, I think the timing was right. More products. Nowadays, I feel like why would anybody use dairy or regular cheese when there's so many great alternatives? I've become very self-righteous, of course, like many vegans. But I never really had that conflict, and I felt like, well, it's not an affront to me, but it's like a new opportunity to sort of share who I am now. And the book that I was working on at the time that we made the transition was the Vegetarian Family Cookbook that came out in, I believe, 2004. So while I was writing it is when we started to make the transition. So I think that may have been the first book that on the cover said with vegan alternatives throughout. And each
Hmm.
recipe had what you could do with dairy and then what you could do non-dairy in it. And then after that, it was really no going back. And people were
Hmm.
starting to really look for that.
Yeah. So you were a pioneer and a leader in the movement, and you were a leader because you went first, but you've also become a leader in terms of like influencing people. You have a very popular website, and blah. You're an influential voice. I'm wondering how you think about leadership
Oh,
for
that's a
for
really
yourself.
interesting question, and probably not good because I'm actually really an introvert and I'm really pretty shy. I do what I need to do. I feel like I'm comfortable speaking. I'm comfortable speaking with you, and I've also done talks, libraries and like Catskill Animal Sanctuary. Um, I can't tell you how terrifying it was at the beginning. I think what happens is if you feel strong enough inside, you just keep putting yourself out there, and eventually your brain learns that you're not being chased by a giant mastodon. You don't have to go into fight or flight mode. And it's true. I mean, the first few talks I did, I honestly, I was fighting fainting because it was so
Wow.
terrifying to me as a shy person. But I also feel like if you have the courage of your convictions, you want to get them out there. And I really, honestly, it's probably not good. I mean, I think women should think of themselves more as leaders, but I don't think about
Mm.
that. I just think about myself as a hardworking person who happens to have this passion. I love to write, I love to cook, I love to do all kinds of creative things, and I've sort of always let the chips fall where they may. But because I'm involved with so many things, not just veganism and vegan cooking. I also run a really huge literary website. I'm a visual artist. um, I guess I don't think of myself as being in a leadership position, but if people think of me that way, that's great. And I feel like because I started so early, I do have the advantage that my earlier books did sell very, very well because they just didn't have as much competition. Now
Mm.
it's very hard to compete in this space.
Mm. Yeah, but I want to push back a little bit, though. I think there's a lot of ways to be a leader
Yeah.
that are not, you know. I think there's sort of a patriarchal model of the leader, like standing up with a sword, raising the army, and everyone's like listening to their charismatic exhortations. But I think there's other kinds of leadership that that has been going on for a long time. And I look at you and your advocacy and your facilitation of helping people make these changes. And I've never heard you, you say you're very self-righteous now. I've never seen you in writing or heard you be strident or self-righteous or anything but inviting. And I think that's a form of leadership that I don't know whether you fell into it or you've chosen to be like, I want to move the needle on the world in these domains, and the literary, in your graphic work, and in the cooking. Um, it does feel like leadership to me, and I'm
Well,
curious. I'm
thank
curious
you.
how you hear that.
Well, it's true. I have felt with veganism, it's really wise to lead with the food and just show people how delicious it is and how easy it is. If you go in with the stridency, people get very defensive. So I feel like I agree with you on that. I've always led with the food. I've always been really honest about my story in my books. I don't go into a lot of graphic detail. Sometimes early on when we would go to, let's say, a Thanksgiving or a Passover or something like that, and people want to know, well, why don't you eat meat? Why don't you use dairy? And I said, I just don't think that's a conversation to have at the table. However, if you really want to know, we can talk about it afterwards.
Hmm.
So yeah, I feel like stridency and putting people on the defensive just doesn't work. And okay, maybe that is a form of leadership, inviting people in with the food. And honestly, when I've done in-person talks and demos at libraries, most of the audience is not vegan, not even vegetarian.
Hmm.
And I think libraries are really a great venue, much more so than bookstores, because bookstores, if you invite people for a talk, they feel a little uneasy. Well, what if I don't want to buy the book? What if I'm not interested? But libraries become community centers, and people love to go to talks and programs at libraries, especially if food is involved. And then the upshot is that people do buy the book. They do take home these ideas. Maybe they do it once, and maybe they don't do it full time. I remember one of the last talks I did before COVID shut us down was at a library, and a woman, I had a bunch of my books and she bought all of them. And I said, "Oh, what put you on your vegan path?" And she said, "My doctor told me I had to." Because I guess she had some sort of condition where the doctor said, look, you either go vegan or you're not going to live very long. So I thought, well, whatever the motivation is, then she has this stack of books now that maybe she'll find interesting and easy. And you probably know my claim to fame also has been easy, approachable, things that you can buy in the supermarket. Because I think that also kind of puts people off when they feel like, oh, am I going to have to go scour around for really unfamiliar ingredients and all that. And, I guess cumulatively, I have done a lot of programs, podcasts, and a lot of them are aimed for people who are just starting out. And so a very common question is, how do I start? And it's such a broad question, but I feel like I do have a really good answer, which is start with what you already like and what you already make, and just see if you can shift it over to be, not, let's say you like pizza. So instead of having a cheese pizza, have a pizza with daya and put spinach and broccoli on it, and you can still have your pizza. What about if I like, you know, the chicken and broccoli stir fry? Okay, replace that with tofu or one of the so-called chicken plant proteins. It's so easy to convert things. So I tell people start with where you are and what you already enjoy eating. There's always a way to make it better.
So the vegan soups and stews for all season, the book that your I guess publicist or publisher reached out to me about and sent me this copy. And we don't dog ear in this family, but we use grocery store receipts. So it's like it's getting really thick because there's so many different placeholders
to mark soups that you want to try.
Well, ones we've already tried.
You've already tried.
We're like, okay, this one, and so so it's vegan. You said this was an update of something that you wrote 32 years ago. What else did you want to do differently other than remove animal products? And I noticed I was a little sad, like, the photos are gorgeous. I don't know who took the photos or styled them, but they're really, really beautiful. But it doesn't have your hand illustrations anymore. And I'm wondering, what you think, what you've gained, what you've lost, how has this aged, this child?
Right. Well, I think people really nowadays, and there's not a photo of each and every recipe, but mostly, and I want to give a shout out to Hannah Kaminsky, who does a lot of my photography work, not only for my books, but for my website. Do you know Hannah?
I know of her. I think I may have run into her at a vegan VitaCon like 14 years ago or longer.
She started early. She's my kid's age, but I love working with her, and we always joke that we share a part of our brain because I live here in not too much upstate New York, and she now lives in Austin. But, our communication is almost nonverbal. I just send her the recipe and she almost knows exactly what I want. So she's very talented. She does the cooking, the styling, the photographing, the post-processing. So I feel like readers now really like a cookbook with a lot of photography. I pretty much know that for a fact. I mean, look at food blogs. You have to have this really lush, gorgeous photography. So with the photography, I just didn't feel like my drawings fit into this particular book. Maybe that's a little bit of a loss, but I feel like in sum total, it's more of a gain. I think it has more of a look and an aesthetic that people are looking for nowadays. And then another thing that was really fun about producing this book is my daughter designed it. So she was the designer, and she did the index, and she worked just as hard on it as I did. The previous edition was vegan, but I retested a lot of the recipes and I added about 20 new ones to the book because I felt if people are going to buy it over again, I wanted to give them something new. Yeah. So it was, it's interesting because sometimes people say, well, was the book fun to do? Well, when you're working on a book, it almost never feels like a lot of fun because it's a lot of work and I'm a perfectionist. But in hindsight, they're always a lot of fun.
Right.
So go ahead.
Is this more collaborative than it used to be?
Oh, for sure. Collaborating more when a book is not just illustrated by me. Oh, and also I had the proofreader was a former editor of mine who edited 4 of my Sterling books, including the Greens book, Vegan Holiday Kitchen. So I was able to pull in a few. A book is always very collaborative, and you can't really edit yourself. This has already been edited a few times, but it had to be have a global edit. So that was kind of nice. And
What sorts of edits? Like I always wonder, like a cookbook, it seems like you're just like heat the oil in a soup pot. Like you want to check that all the ingredients that are listed are used. But what are the stylistic edits that go into making the difference between an imperfect cookbook and one that's really taken to the next level?
yeah, I think cookbooks are among the most edit heavy kind of nonfiction titles because not only you start a book usually a year before you finish it, so you want to also you want to say things the same way. Um, in the instructions, I'm trying to think of an example. Like you maybe lower the heat, cover, and simmer. You might end up saying that really differently a year later. So the
Uh-huh.
copy editor makes sure that all of those styles are the same. Like you said, you want to make sure that the ingredients are listed in the order that they appear in the instructions. You want to make sure that some of the ingredients aren't missing. I'm sorry to say, I think I found a handful of typos in here already. It's so easy to have typos in cookbooks. So hopefully the next printing, hopefully there'll be another next printing. It's nothing that would make a recipe not turn out well, and usually the
Mhm.
reader can figure it out. But yeah, it is a very very edit intensive type of book. It seems so simple when it comes out, but there's just so much that goes on underneath.
Yeah. How do you decide what to do next?
You mean in terms of my life or in the book?
You know what? Those are I don't know which one is going to be a more interesting answer, so I'm gonna leave it ambiguous and let you run with it.
Okay. Well, I have next year, I actually have a very different kind of book coming out. It's called Inspired by Cats, Writers and Their Feline Muses. And I was the writer, and Bob Eckstein, who is a very talented illustrator and former New Yorker cartoonist, is the illustrator on this one. It's very odd for me not to be the illustrator, but he has gotten known for a certain style. If I can give him a shout out, his new book, Footnotes from the Most Fascinating Museums, just came out and it's beautiful. And he did a book called Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores. So it does seem a little different for me, but on the other hand, I am always really interested in exploring the human and animal bond.
Hmm.
And though I did not say it in this book, I do wonder, people, especially with, I don't know, I guess with dogs and cats, people really treat their companion animals almost as human. They're part of the family. I don't know that any of the 60 authors that I wrote about from the past, who was the first? I don't know, maybe the Brontes, through maybe 10 authors who are still living. I don't know if there's a single vegetarian or vegan among them, but they feel about their animal is, when the animal dies, the animal's really, it's such a grieving period. It's so interesting, and how the animal really inspires them, alleviates their anxiety, maybe, sneaks into their literature. But then that disconnect, which of course I can't really talk about in a book like this, but that disconnect still exists. I can treat my animal, I can, spend $7,000 so that this cat can have a surgery, but I think nothing of, eating an animal on my plate. I just find that really, to me,
Yeah.
it's mind blowing.
Have you seen the website for Elwood's dog meat?
No. What? Wait, what? Wood? Wait, who? Are you Elle Woods, did you say?
Yeah. Elwood's dog meat.
Oh, Elle Woods. When you said Elle Woods, I was thinking of Reese Witherspoon's character in Legally Blonde. So I was like, what? No, no, I don't know about this.
Oh, it's a. I saw them on Facebook, and it's basically a family farm that, but instead of cows or chickens or lambs, it's dogs. And so they have pictures of, golden retrievers, and it's a vegan site.
I don't get it. So is this like a thought experiment?
Well, it's basically, like identity. They're pretending to be a family farm, and they say all the things that regenerative farms say.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
I'm sure they don't have time to write it. They just go to these farms and to these websites and just
Yeah.
copy and just replace whatever pig with dog.
Yeah.
And
Gosh.
I mean, it's brilliant.
Well, I think years ago I read about a similar thought experiment I don't remember which book it was. It was probably one of the more narrative types of books about that disconnect we're talking about. That people are coming, they come to sit at the table, it's an elegant dinner, they get served their food, and then the host tells them it's from a golden retriever, and people are horrified. Wow, so this sounds like they're kind of on the similar, doing this thought experiment. And I bet that a lot of people have slammed them for it. Wouldn't you think?
Well, I think most people don't get it.
Oh, do
So
they
I think
really
people
think
think,
it's
I
selling
think people,
dog meat?
what's
Hmm.
that?
Do they really think that this place is selling dog meat and
Yeah.
people want to buy it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're, it's very meta, right? Because they'll
Yeah.
post a comment saying, you effers should die. How dare you? And then they'll create a response the same that echoes what like a poly farm would say. We're part of the natural system. Our dogs lead very happy lives, and they just have one bad day at the end. Like
Oh my
like
gosh. Yeah,
they're kind of inoculating you to, because they're using the exact same language
yeah,
as,
for
but
sure.
it's dog.
It's dog. I know, and people are probably horrified by that. But again, people need to examine why does that disconnect exist? It's really perplexing, and I don't personally understand it. So I don't know, maybe there's some underlying message in this book that will come out that will resonate with some people, though really I don't go there at all. We're just
Yeah.
really exploring the bond of a cat as a muse and as a companion, and how important it has been, the cats have been to these authors' process even.
Uh-huh.
So it's been interesting. It is one of those books, and I really just finished writing
What's
it.
it what's it called?
Oh, the title is Inspired by Cats. It'll be coming out in a little bit over a year. I would say maybe the fall of 2025, by me, Nava Atlas as the writer, and Bob Eckstein, that's Eckstein, as the illustrator. And he's awesome. He's really so talented. It has been really fun to work with him. And in a year, I will say that it has been really fun to write this book. But when you're in the throes of it, it's like you just want everything to be perfect, and you go
Uh-huh.
over it a million times. And but now it's been an interesting process, and I've learned a lot about a lot of writers that, of course, I knew about, but I didn't know much about their personal life or their life with their animals. It's
Uh-huh.
fascinating.
So are you doing any like primary research, like PhD level stuff, like, Byron had a cat, like stuff?
Well, I would say that it's funny because when I started writing this, Bob reminded me this is not a PhD. This is not a PhD thesis. It's not even a master's thesis. But I feel like I am doing PhD level research about banned books. That's another subject that interests me a great deal.
Ah,
Not literally a PhD, at least not yet. But I am delving like really deeply into the history of banned books. It's very pertinent and it's very important. And
wow. Can I ask you about that?
maybe not this time because I'm not that far along with it. But yeah, well, we
Okay.
can talk. We can talk.
Okay. Very cool. Because I think, I find that especially on social media, I can get very caught up in a very myopic hysteric over what's happening now. And, I'm trained as a historian, and there's always a point where something will penetrate my consciousness around to put something in a historical context, and it will almost always make me smarter and more compassionate and more useful if I decide to weigh in some way. So I'm really curious about, there's clearly two sides to the banned book thing, and there's like us on the right side and those other people on the wrong side. And I find that, when I look at the history of something, it kind of softens things. It makes it a little bit more complex, but it also gives me more power. And I'm wondering, I don't
Yeah.
know, you don't necessarily
Well,
want
no,
to
I
talk
was
about
going
it
to say
yet.
I am delving into the history, and what I can just tell you in a nutshell is that everything that's going on today, there's nothing new. Everything, all these book bannings, and even the reasons for the book bannings, whatever is new, old is new again. It's all happened before. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of what I'm delving into. It is really, really fascinating.
Uh,
Yeah.
have
Going
you
back
have you
to the
ta- have you
19th.
talked to any have you talked to any contemporary authors who are subject of book bannings?
Not yet. I'm hoping that it'll get to that point. Yeah. And to
Okay.
even maybe even point out to them, do you know that something similar happened to so and so in the 1920s or something, or the 1890s? So, and
Uh-huh.
this a lot of this history has really been lost, and I'm just finding it really fascinating. It's another level of complexity to human nature. It's almost like, we don't understand that divide. People who are vegan, vegan for animal reasons, can't understand that division in the brain that some people have where they can have a dog or a cat but then eat other animals. Well, I also feel it's really interesting to put what's happening in today's world into context because nothing happens in a vacuum.
Yeah. Huh. Trying to think of where I had a bunch of questions. I'm just taking this one in. I think it's so I'm
We'll
vamping here
revisit
for
this
some.
down the road. It's a big topic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know what I wanted to ask. So if you clearly have a historical bent to your mind, and like make me appreciate context. Have you looked at like the current wave of veganism, which we'll say like started with you and a bunch of others, like from the '70s on, in a historical context, not necessarily about plant-based or vegan, but just like food movements? Like can we learn something from like, the Kellogg's of the 19th century or
Yeah, I have that really very briefly at the beginning of Vegetariana. Here I'll just hold up, and people who are listening won't see, but the Eastern roots and then the Western roots. Eastern roots China and India, Western roots Pythagoras, and then some of the early vegetarians, vegans, and animal advocates. I mean, they may not have called themselves vegans, but I bet some of them were. I think Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley, who I love. The creature in Frankenstein was a vegan.
no? Yeah.
He said, "My food is not that of man. I do not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. My companion will be of the same nature as myself, and we will be content with the same fare. The sun will shine on us as man and will ripen our food." So that's really interesting. And Percy Shelley, who was, of course, Mary Shelley's really naughty husband, said the advocates of a new diet. And they called their diet, I think they just called it the natural diet. The advocate of a new diet is held bound to be invulnerable to disease in the same manner as the secretaries of a new religion are held to be more moral than other people. In other words, they were just starting to do this and they were expected to be perfect or that their health would be perfect. And they were just figuring it out as they went along. Something that actually interests me a great deal is the early, what they called themselves the anti-vivisectionists, and it was led by women like Annie Besant and the Theosophists. And I was thinking, I don't know that this would be a great idea for a general type of book, but I also do limited editions, and I thought that would be really interesting to look at the early. Um, well, vivisection, I think, is um, doing experiments on animals, and these women were very much
Yeah,
against.
live animals.
Right. So there's a bunch of them whose names have really been lost to history. Many of them were British, but I thought, it's really nice to bring back people who have been forgotten. That's another one of my things, especially with my literary websites.
Yeah.
So, one of
Yeah.
my favorite things to draw, my favorite people to draw was Karl Marx.
Uh-huh.
He was by no means a vegetarian or a vegan, but he visited, I think, a farm, an animal-based agriculture farm, and his whole thing was economics and socialism. And he was probably the first one to write about how inefficient animal agriculture was. And then he said he visited a farm and he called it disgusting. So, and this was, I don't know, I guess he died in 1883. So this may have been, in the 1870s, something like that. So he recognized both the inefficiency and the cruelty of animal
Uh,
agriculture. So I don't know if you have noticed, I am a giant nerd. I just love thinking about these really arcane things. They're fascinating.
so it's yeah. So when people talk about vegans, like commies, like, oh yeah, we got Carl.
Well, again, I don't think I don't think he ate very well altogether, vegetarian or vegan. But let's see, I have Benjamin.
Probably all got stuck in his beard.
Yeah, this is true. He had quite a beard. But eventually, Benjamin Franklin experimented with vegetarianism. But I think in those times, I mean, look, they didn't have soy milk or rice milk. It was probably just too hard to stick to it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think also he went to France a lot, and they certainly weren't into that. So, yeah, I have a thing here about the origins of modern veganism, and the word vegan is attributed to Donald Watson, who coined it in 1944 with the Vegan Society of Britain. So I didn't know about that before. And then, so we owe a lot to Peter Singer, also, who wrote about animal agriculture in the modern time. So,
Yeah, I managed to get him on the podcast last year.
oh, really? Wow. I was going to say I didn't even know he was still alive, but I just said it. I'm glad
Yeah,
he's alive.
he seems to be doing well. Yeah, there's
That's,
a whole bunch of people, including you, the first time, where I'm like nervous because like these are like
uh,
huge people in my life. Like when you're a nerd,
yeah.
the people that you fanboy or fangirl are accessible, right? Like it's not like if I wanted to meet Beyonce. I don't know that I could do it, but the people that I think are the most important people in the world, I actually get to talk to sometimes, and it makes me nervous.
Well, I'm definitely not a person who makes other people nervous. I'm a giant nerd. When I say giant, take that with a grain of salt because I'm barely 5 feet tall.
Oh, well, you're probably comfortable on airplanes.
Oh my gosh, it is really, that is an advantage of being small nowadays. On American airplanes, that is. When I fly to Iceland, I have an airport nearby. I don't have to go to Newark or Kennedy, God forbid. They have two flights, one to Florida and one to Reykjavik. Well, guess
Huh.
which one I go to? So it's called Play Airlines. It's so comfortable. But yeah, being a small person on an airplane is really good.
Yeah, it's probably good for the environment too. I think we should all try to be smaller to have smaller carbon footprints and
Yeah. And speaking of Reykjavik, which I'm returning to this summer for my fifth time, what a vegan friendly paradise that is. Reykjavik, Iceland.
really.
Who would have thought? It's
Wow,
amazing.
I just pictured, all the tourists would be given like whale meat.
No, there's a huge vegan movement there. And is I think my favorite vegan restaurant in the entire world so far is in Reykjavik. It's called Vegan World Peace.
Hmm.
It's amazing. It's Pan-Asian. And there are many, and oh, I have to tell you, in the supermarkets there in Reykjavik, they have many more vegan cheese and plant protein brands, much more than I have here in New York. I mean, gosh,
They are European or
yes,
local?
mostly from Europe. I have seen Violife there quite a bit, but the other brands are European. I think a lot of them come from Sweden. and they're really good, really, really good. Both the cheeses and the plant protein type of things. There's like
Uh-huh.
huge sections. It's amazing. They're so far
Yeah,
ahead.
I can find there's a company called Heura. How I don't know how it's pronounced.
Oh,
I guess
okay.
there's the H is silent in Spain. Heura that makes like nuggets and patties and various things.
And you find those near
So I
you?
think they seem to be a little bit like Beyond or Impossible.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
There's a very famous
yeah.
brand in Reykjavik called Oomph, and I know that comes from Sweden. They make all kinds of plant proteins. They use both in the supermarket, and also a lot of the restaurants use Oomph. So it's very cool. I think that people who have this other idea of Iceland as serving puffins and whale meats, they'd be very pleasantly surprised.
Oh
And it's also just a very cool place, very, very civilized.
yeah. Well, can you get by in English, or is I
Everybody
guess
speaks English.
everybody? And
Yeah,
what the first language is it Icelandic or
Icelandic, which is a
Swedish?
very hard language to learn. But everybody, I mean, especially the young people, everybody speaks English, I would say very well. I think they just study it in school from the beginning. So, yeah, everybody go to Iceland. Not in December, though, because it's almost always dark. Go in July
Ah,
or August when it's almost always light.
nice. Um, I I don't have any more questions. Is there anything else you wanted to
Yeah,
talk
I just
about?
really would like to just invite people to visit my website, theveganatlas.com. If you're interested in literature, it's called literaryladiesguide.com. And just, if people are still at the beginning, my message is always to start where you are and just convert what you already like, and you're going to be ahead of the game.
Hmm. Beautiful. And yeah, in a world in which there are now so many different vegan bloggers and cookbook authors and influencers and YouTubers, there's something really nice about kind of going to the classics. And I know you're producing new stuff, but your sensibility is sort of fad resistant.
Well, thank you. I
So
mean,
so
yeah, some of us call ourselves the OGs, and the first time I heard that was at the first, I think it's called the Vegan World, oh, no, the Plant-Based World Expo in New York. So there was Fran Costigan. I'm going to blank the person who's,
Victoria Moran.
yeah, Victoria, and the people who started the Candle Cafe. And she said, we
Uh-huh.
were kind of all standing in the same area, and she said, "Oh, we're the OGs." And I never heard that expression, and I thought she meant the old gals, but she meant the originals. So that, yeah, I'm very honored to be in that group also. And we've,
Yeah, and I hope you guys feel honored by the newer generations,
I
because I know
do,
there's a lot
absolutely.
of there's a lot of communities where the old is like passé and we have to, but I'm hoping that because of the sort of the ethical sensibility of the movement, that the young ones who now have the hot blog and just got the new, uh, Amazon Prime cooking show or whatever,
Oh
are
my God,
still
what about TikTok?
yeah,
TikTok.
are still like they know where they're, on whose shoulders they're standing.
Yeah. Well, even if they don't specifically know, if they're, let's say, 18 years old, they got it from somewhere. The DNA flows somehow, and they're doing it also, and that's a good thing.
Ah, nice. Oh, it's a very generous attitude. So I think we'll close on that high note.
Thank
So theveganatlas.com is where people can follow you. And can they find your literary stuff there, or are there other
you. That's
websites?
completely separate. That's literaryladiesguide.com.
Literary, I'm going to write this down with a
Okay,
circle
it's
next to
one
it.
word, literaryladiesguide.com.
Literary, I just spelled literary wrong 3 times. Literaryladiesguide.com. Cool. Are you on TikTok?
No,
Okay.
I mean, I have nothing against TikTok. I just, there's just so much a person can do.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I'm
Good,
barely
because I
Instagram.
wouldn't know if you were, because I'm not on it either.
Yeah. All the more power to them. And I hope the United States government doesn't shut it down, because that would be a really pretty lousy thing to do. To a lot of people have built their businesses on TikTok.
Yeah,
So
it's a good way to lose a lot of votes.
mm, who knows? It's
So,
crazy here.
so yeah, yeah. Well, Nava, thank you so much. And
Thank
and the latest book, the one that your publicist wanted us to talk about,
you.
which we covered a little bit, is I'm holding it up for video viewers: Vegan Soups and Stews for All Seasons. It really is gorgeous. Like if you're just looking, if you're feeling like you just need a little creative push, this is a fabulous cookbook. It's paperback. It's not too thick. It'll fit on your shelf. And I've got to say, we've had about 9 or 10 dishes from it, and they've all been winners.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for having me on again. Maybe we'll talk about cats next year. And
Okay, I've never been a fan, so maybe you can convert me. I've always been more of a dog guy.
well, dogs are great too.
So, yeah, but I have a binary mind. It's got to be a competition.
Okay. Well, take care
So,
and thank you. And I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
me too. Take care, and thanks for all you do.
Oh, thank
I hope to talk to you again soon.
you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. And that's a wrap. You can check out the show notes from today's episode at plantyourself.com/586, which is coincidentally or not, the number of home runs that Frank Robinson hit during his Major League Baseball career. So what's going on here? Speaking of careers, getting back into Beach Ultimate, the bike accident I had in France and the back problem before that have really taken a toll on my cardio. So working with my trainer Jay on getting that back. We did some nasty exercises yesterday, in fact, where I'm boxing, doing 51 twos, then dropping for 5 push-ups, and then running a sprint out and back and repeating that 2 more times. Utterly brutal. Had no idea how brutal it was to combine various different systems and overload them all at the same time. So hopefully that's going to make a rapid improvement, because I got the tournament coming up July 5th and 6th in Burgos, which I found on the map. It's north of Madrid. Otherwise, in terms of career, I am looking for a couple of new coaching clients who are specifically looking to increase their leadership capabilities, who want to have more composure, who want to have more influence, who want to be more powerful in creating the culture of their team and their organization, rather than having to navigate around it or fit into it or fight against it. So if you know anyone like that, you can send them to me. You can tell them my website's askhowie.com, or just send them to the podcast and tell them to listen to the last little bit. And I would appreciate that. So that's it for this time. As always, be well, my friends.